Dust floated in the late afternoon light like tiny spirits, dancing between the cracks of a dying sun. The arena at the Bleak Hollow stockyard was nearly empty now, save for a handful of weathered men and women who'd stayed out of habit more than interest. The smell of dirt, rusted steel, and warm animals clung to the air like old regrets. As the announcer's tired voice echoed over the loudspeaker, a heavy tension settled across the place. This wasn't just the last lot of the day. It was the lot nobody wanted. And everyone knew what that meant. The gate creaked open, and out stepped a Mustang stallion, strong, scarred, and proud, even in his brokenness. His coat was a deep chestnut marred with old injuries, and his wild eyes darted from side to side like he was still trying to find a way out. But there was no way out. Not here. Not now. "Lot 47, called out Emmerich Boone, the auctioneer, his voice dry as gravel. "Untamed Mustang. 7 years old. No training. No history. Starting bid, $200. Silence followed. The kind that weighs heavy in your chest. Not a single hand went up. Someone chuckled under their breath. Thaddeus Kane, a rancher older than most trees, leaned against the railing and muttered, "Might as well load him straight onto the slaughter truck." A few nodded, not cruelly, but with the quiet resignation of people who'd seen too many animals meet the same end. This was the kind of horse that didn't make it into trailers bound for new homes. He was bound for a place with no names, just numbers and steel walls. Everyone knew it. No one liked it. But that's how it went. Then, without warning, the rusted side gate opened again, not for a horse, but for a person. She moved through the fading light like she didn't belong to the dust or the noise around her. A young woman in worn-out jeans, scuffed boots, and a navy hoodie with the word empathy stitched across the back. She walked straight toward the lot, her eyes fixed on the Mustang like she could see something no one else could. The crowd fell silent, watching her, confused. She didn't hesitate. She didn't speak to anyone. She just kept walking. The Mustang froze. His ears perked forward, and he took a small step toward her, not in fear, but in something closer to recognition. She stopped in front of him, only a few feet away, and stood still. She didn't raise her hand. She didn't speak. She just looked at him, and something passed between them, a silent thread pulled tight between two souls who had been lost for too long. The wind picked up, brushing the dust into soft spirals around their feet. And then, finally, she said it. Quiet, but clear, $200. "He's mine." The crowd whispered, half in disbelief, half in curiosity. Emmerich hesitated, then slammed the gavel down. "Sold." The girl turned toward the horse, and for the first time, he didn't flinch. He took another step toward her. That was all. No theatrics. No applause. Just a shared moment, quiet and strange, as if the world had paused. No one knew who she was. No one knew why she had come. But later, they would all remember the name Marlen Ivy. And they would learn, too late, that this wasn't just a rescue. It was the return of a past buried deep. And the Mustang? He wasn't just any horse. He was part of something she had spent years trying to forget. Marlen didn't speak as she loaded the Mustang into her old trailer. The horse walked in without resistance, his calmness almost unsettling. She locked the gate and stood there a moment, her hand resting on the door. Something about this horse pulled at a memory she couldn't place. She hadn't come to Bleak Hollow for this. But now he was hers, and she felt that choice tighten around her chest like a rope. The road home was long and quiet. No music. No words. Just the hum of tires and the occasional glance at the mirror, where his eyes still met hers through the trailer window. He didn't panic. He didn't move. He watched. Marlen hated how familiar it felt, being seen like that. As if he wasn't a stranger at all, but a reminder of something she'd tried hard to forget. The Ivy Hollow ranch hadn't changed. The paint had peeled. The gates sagged. But the ghost still lingered in the soil. Her father had died in the barn. Her mother left not long after. Marlen left too, and promised never to return. And yet, here she was, back where everything started falling apart. She backed the trailer to the corral and opened the door. The Mustang stepped out slowly, ears high, taking it all in. He stood still, breathing deep. Marlen leaned on the fence, arms crossed. "You don't know where you are," she muttered. "That makes two of us." She watched as he sniffed the dry grass, calm but alert. The silence between them was thick, heavier than words. This place wasn't home anymore. It was a memory, and not a kind one. That night, she couldn't sleep. The wind moved through the house like whispers. Old floorboards creaked under nothing, and all she could see were those eyes, staring at her like they knew something. It made her uneasy, not because he was wild, but because he wasn't. He was too still, too knowing, and that scared her more than she wanted to admit. Before sunrise, she walked out to the corral. The Mustang stood alone, quiet as ever. She rested her arms on the rail and spoke softly. "I should have let them take you." But even as she said it, she knew she couldn't have. He reminded her of someone, of a face she hadn't seen in 7 years. And with that memory came a chill, because something was returning, something she thought was buried for good. The morning air was cooler than expected, carrying the scent of dry hay and old wood. Marlen stepped into the barn for the first time in years. Dust coated every surface. Tools hung where her father had left them, untouched by time. The silence inside was different, not peaceful, but waiting. She ran her fingers across a wooden beam, her chest tightening with every step. This was where it had happened. The day that changed everything. The place no one talked about anymore. Outside, the Mustang paced the edge of the corral, alert but not panicked. He kept glancing toward the barn, as if drawn by something inside. Marlen noticed. She stood at the open doorway, watching him. "You feel it too, don't you?" she whispered. "That chill. That pull." She hadn't spoken her father's name in years, but now it sat heavy on her tongue. Callum Ivy. A man known for breaking horses, and sometimes people. Marlen walked back to the corral slowly. The Mustang stopped pacing as she approached. "You remind me of him," she said, her voice low. "Stubborn. Quiet. Always watching." She didn't know why she said it. Maybe because this horse had the same look her father had in his final weeks. Tired, proud, and full of secrets. Secrets that died with him. Or so she thought. She reached out her hand, and for the first time, the Mustang stepped forward and touched his nose to her palm. It was brief, but it was something. Her breath caught. There was a strange weight in that moment, like a piece of a puzzle snapping into place. She pulled away, suddenly overwhelmed. She didn't come here for healing. She came to disappear. But now, this animal was pulling her back into something she wasn't ready to face. That evening, she found an old box in the attic. Letters. Receipts. A journal. Her father's handwriting filled the pages, rough and jagged. Most of it was about horses, training notes, feeding schedules. But near the back, the tone changed. Dates. Names. And one line that stopped her cold. 7 years. One mistake. She'll never forgive me. Her hands trembled. She didn't know what the mistake was, but it was about her. She knew that much. As night fell, Marlen sat in the barn doorway, staring into the dark. The Mustang stood in the corral, facing her, unmoving. The journal lay in her lap, open to that single line. And for the first time in years, she felt something crack inside her. Not pain. Not grief. Something older. Something buried. She looked at the horse again, her voice just above a whisper. What did he do? And why do I feel like you already know? The next morning, the sky was overcast, a gray blanket pressing low over the hills of Lockridge County. Marlen stood on the porch with a mug of black coffee in her hands, staring at the corral where the mustang moved in slow circles. The wind picked up, rattling the loose boards on the barn, and for a moment she felt like a child again. Small, uncertain, and waiting for something terrible to happen. The journal still sat on the kitchen table behind her, open to that same cryptic sentence. "She'll never forgive me." The words spun in her mind, attaching themselves to old memories she'd locked away so long ago they barely felt like hers anymore. She couldn't stop thinking about the day she left. The screaming. The slammed doors. The silence that followed her into adulthood like a second shadow. Her father had tried to reach out once, a letter she never opened, mailed 2 weeks before his heart gave out. And now, this horse, this strange, silent horse with fire in his eyes, had shown up like a living symbol of all she had refused to confront. She found herself walking toward the corral again, drawn to him with a kind of desperation she didn't fully understand. "You saw something," she said softly, resting her arms on the fence. "You were there, weren't you? You know more than I do." The mustang lifted his head and stared at her with the kind of stillness that feels ancient. There was something unsettling about his gaze, not aggressive, not fearful, just knowing. She had seen hundreds of horses growing up, but never one that looked at her like this. It wasn't just instinct. It wasn't just trust. It was like he recognized her from a story she hadn't read yet. And when he turned and walked slowly to the barn door, stopping right where her father had collapsed 7 years ago, her breath caught in her chest. "No," she whispered. "You couldn't know that." But he stood there, waiting, unmoving. And Marlen, against every part of her better judgment, followed. The barn was cold inside, quiet, except for the groan of the roof in the wind. The mustang walked in like he belonged there, like he remembered it. He stopped at the same stall Callum used to work from, the stall where the accident happened. Marlen's footsteps were slow, almost reverent. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached out to touch the stall door. And then she saw it, carved into the wood, barely visible beneath years of dust and weathering. A name. Marlen. She stepped back, her breath shallow. Her father had carved her name into the stall. Why? What had he been trying to say? Later that evening, she went back to the attic and dug deeper through the old box. Beneath stacks of receipts and veterinary notes, she found a folder sealed in plastic. Inside were adoption papers, but not for her. For a horse. A mustang. 7 years ago. The same year everything fell apart. The horse's ID number matched the one burned into the mustang's neck, barely visible now. Her father had rescued this horse. Hidden it. Protected it. But why? Why had he kept it secret? And why had no one ever told her? Marlen sat on the porch long after the sun went down, the stars struggling to pierce the clouds above. She felt the pieces of something larger beginning to shift, like a story unfolding from the inside out. The horse, now pacing slowly in the corral, was part of that story. Somehow, he had survived something alongside her father. And now, all that unfinished history was resurfacing. As the wind picked up and the old barn door creaked open once more, she whispered into the night, "What happened between you and him, and why am I only finding out now?" The storm rolled in fast. Thick clouds swallowed the sky, and wind swept through the trees like a warning. Marlen stood by the barn, eyes on the mustang. He paced the corral, calm, alert, like he knew something was coming. She clutched the wet papers in her hand, adoption records, a transfer form, and one name circled in red ink, Rhett Holloway. A name she hadn't spoken in 7 years. Rhett used to be her father's best friend. Trusted. Respected. Then, Just before her father's death, he disappeared without a word. Now, his name was all over the files connected to the horse. This wasn't a coincidence. This horse wasn't just some stray from the wild. He had a past. One that had been carefully hidden, until now. She opened the barn gate, heart pounding. The Mustang stepped inside, like he'd been waiting. Rain hit the tin roof in steady rhythm. She watched him stop by the old stall, the same spot where her father collapsed all those years ago. And carved into the wood, still faint but there, was her name. Marlen. Why would her father carve her name here, unless it meant something? She couldn't ignore it anymore. She went inside the house, found the old rotary phone, and dialed. Her hand shook as the line rang. "Holloway Residence," a voice said. She froze. "Rhett," she whispered. Silence. Then, "Marlen." His voice cracked. "You shouldn't be calling me." But she did. She told him about the horse, the files, the carving, her father. There was a long pause. Then Rhett said quietly, "That horse wasn't just his. He was the reason your father died." Marlen's breath caught. She asked what he meant. He just said, "Meet me tomorrow. There's more." Too much for the phone. Marlen hung up slowly. Outside, the Mustang stood in the dark rain, still watching. And in that moment, she realized the truth was closer than ever. Something her father died protecting. Something Rhett ran from. And now, it was her turn to face it, whatever it was. Marlen barely slept. The storm passed sometime after midnight, but the tension stayed. She paced the kitchen with the old journal in one hand and the phone still clutched in the other. Rhett's voice echoed in her head. "He was the reason your father died." But how could a horse cause something like that? Her father had trained wild mustangs his whole life. He respected them, understood them in a way few could. Whatever happened that night in the barn, it wasn't just an accident. And this horse, standing so still outside her window, was the only one left who had been there. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the air felt heavier than before. She packed up the papers, wrapped the journal in a cloth, and loaded the Mustang into the trailer. He didn't resist. It was like he knew where they were going, or maybe he just trusted her now. The drive took nearly an hour. Through hills, past empty fields, and finally to the edge of a broken fence and a long-forgotten barn. Rhett's truck was already there, parked under an old oak tree. Marlen's hands were tight on the wheel, her stomach knotted. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a reckoning. Rhett looked older than she remembered. His hair was mostly gray now, his face drawn, eyes sunken with guilt. He didn't smile when she stepped out. Didn't even speak at first. Just stared at the horse as she opened the trailer. The Mustang stepped out and looked straight at him. Rhett's jaw tightened. "I thought I'd never see him again," he said. "And I hoped I wouldn't." Marlen didn't respond. She waited. And when he finally looked at her, there was something broken in his eyes. "Your father died trying to protect you from something he thought he could fix." He explained it slowly, carefully. 7 years ago, Callum had taken in a Mustang no one could break. Not because he was dangerous, but because he'd been part of something dark. Illegal racing. Underground fights. A ring of men using horses for profit and pain. Rhett had found out too late, and when he tried to walk away, they threatened him. Callum tried to get the horse out, to shut it all down. But the night he carved Marlen's name into the stall, he knew he was running out of time. That's when it happened. He was found dead the next morning, alone, and the Mustang was gone. Marlen stood frozen. Everything she believed about her father shifted in that moment. He hadn't just died. He died trying to protect her, and this horse had been the silent witness to it all. She looked at the mustang, his body still, his eyes soft. She whispered, "You were never just a horse, were you?" Rhett nodded slowly. "He's the last piece of your father's fight. The only one who came back." And as the wind moved through the trees, Marlen felt the truth settle deep inside her. Whatever came next, she had to finish what her father started. They sat on the tailgate of Rhett's truck as the wind picked up around them, stirring dry leaves and dust into the air. Marlen kept her eyes on the mustang, who stood quietly in the clearing, head low but alert. Her mind raced with everything Rhett had just told her. She had come looking for answers. Now she had more than she ever expected. Her father hadn't died alone. He had died fighting. Not just for a horse, but for the truth. For her. And suddenly, the weight of all those silent years came crashing down on her chest. Rhett lit a cigarette with shaking hands, something he hadn't done in years. "I should have stopped it," he said. "I should have gone with him that night. But I was scared, Marlen. They weren't just cowboys with anger problems. They were organized. Dangerous." He paused, then looked at her. "Your dad trusted the wrong man to help him. That man told the others. That's how they found out. The stall. The name. Her name. It wasn't a tribute, it had been a warning. A message left behind in case he didn't survive." Marlen felt cold all over. Her voice came out low. "So they knew about me?" Rhett nodded. "They knew everything. But after Callum died, the heat came down on them hard. The ring scattered. Some were arrested. Others disappeared. I changed my number. Moved out here. Tried to disappear too." He paused. "But the mustang, he vanished. I thought someone put him down. But he came back. Found you." Marlen didn't reply. She just stared at the horse, suddenly understanding why his eyes felt so familiar, because they had seen everything she'd spent her life avoiding. The mustang had survived pain, betrayal, and silence, just like she had. And now he stood here again, in front of the same people who had once failed to save her father. But this time, she wouldn't run. "I want to know who's still out there," she said firmly. "I want names." Rhett hesitated, but nodded slowly. "There's one," he said. "Still local. Still dangerous. And if he sees that horse again, he'll know what it means." Marlen's hands curled into fists. "Good," she said. "Let him know. I'm not afraid anymore." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the field, Marlen walked back toward the mustang. She rested her hand on his neck. He didn't move. For the first time, she felt like they were breathing the same air, living the same truth. Her father had died trying to stop something ugly from spreading. And now, all these years later, that weight had fallen to her. But she wasn't alone. Not anymore. And in that silence, filled only by wind and memory, she whispered, "We finish this. Together." The name Rhett gave her echoed in Marlen's mind like a gunshot. Clayton Marrow. It was a name she hadn't heard since she was a teenager. Back when he used to show up at the ranch, all charm and fake smiles, talking business with her father behind closed doors. She remembered her mother growing quiet whenever Clayton's truck pulled up. There had always been something off about him. Now she knew why. He was part of the ring. Maybe even the one who set it all in motion. Rhett warned her not to go looking for him. But she already knew she would. The next morning, she loaded the Mustang into the trailer again. She didn't have a plan, not really. Just instinct. She drove past the old fairgrounds, through the back roads toward Clayton's property, a sprawling ranch hidden behind a rusted gate with a crooked mailbox. The place looked deserted, but her gut told her otherwise. She parked down the road, walked the rest of the way. The Mustang waited in the trailer, calm as ever, like he trusted her completely now. As she approached the gate, her breath slowed. The last time someone faced these men, her father died. But she wasn't him, and this time she wasn't alone. The barn doors were cracked open. She slipped inside, the smell of oil and old hay thick in the air. At first, it was quiet. Then footsteps. Heavy. Slow. And there he was, older, heavier, but still with that same cold grin. Clayton Marrow. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "You got your daddy's eyes. Same fire, too." Marlen didn't flinch. "You know why I'm here." Clayton chuckled. "Let me guess. That horse out there jogged some memories? Should have stayed buried, girl." His voice turned sharp. "Like your father." She stood her ground. "He died because he tried to stop you." Clayton took a step forward. "He died because he couldn't mind his own business." That was all Marlen needed to hear. She stepped back, whistled once, a short, sharp sound her father used to use. The mustang, already outside the barn, let out a high-pitched cry. Then silence. Clayton's expression shifted, just slightly. "That horse is a witness," she said. "And I've got papers, proof, everything you tried to erase. I'm done running. And you should start." Clayton didn't laugh this time. He just watched her, eyes narrowing. "You don't know what you're stirring up, girl." But Marlen had already turned and walked out, the mustang now standing beside her like a sentinel. For the first time in years, she felt her father's presence not as a memory, but as a legacy, something unfinished, now passed to her. She looked back at the barn once more, knowing this wasn't over. But it had begun. And whatever came next, she was ready. Marlen didn't sleep that night. Her hands were still trembling hours after leaving Clayton's ranch. She kept replaying his face, the way his grin had faltered when the mustang let out that cry, like he knew his time was running out. She had done what her father never could, looked the devil in the eye and walked away. But she also knew this wasn't the end. Men like Clayton didn't fade quietly. And whatever came next, it would be louder, meaner. She lit a fire in the old stone pit behind the barn and sat beside the mustang, letting the silence between them fill her bones. Rhett called just after midnight. "You shouldn't have gone there," he said. She didn't answer right away. "I had to," she finally whispered. "He needed to see I'm not afraid." Rhett sighed. "They'll push back. He'll try something." Marlen nodded slowly. "Then let him." For the first time, she wasn't scared of the truth. She was scared of silence. Of leaving things buried, like her father did. This land had already swallowed too much, it wouldn't take her voice too. She hung up and walked back to the barn, her boots echoing on the worn wood floor. The mustang followed her like a shadow. In the back of the barn, she found her father's old saddle. Cracked leather. Dusty straps. It still smelled like him. She ran her fingers along the edges, tears rising uninvited. She remembered the last time she saw him, how he had tried to tell her something but never found the words. Maybe he thought he had more time. Or maybe he believed the truth would only hurt her. But now, she understood, silence was the real wound. And the only way to heal it was to speak. To act. She placed the saddle gently on a bench and looked at the mustang. "You ready?" she asked softly. His ears flicked forward. Still. Focused. The next morning, the sheriff showed up. Someone had reported a trespasser at Clayton's place. A woman, a trailer, a wild horse. Marlen stood on the porch, calm. She handed over the adoption records, the journal, and her father's note. She didn't flinch. She told them everything. Not just about that night, but about the years of silence, the men who ran the ring, the buried truth. It was a risk. But she wasn't hiding anymore. The sheriff, an older man who had known Marlen Ivy, looked her in the eye and said, "It's about time someone brought this forward." As the squad car drove away, Marlen sat on the porch steps, the Mustang grazing nearby. The wind was lighter now, the sky clear. For the first time in years, the land didn't feel like it was holding its breath. She knew trouble might still come. Clayton wouldn't go down easy. But the weight was shifting. Her father's story wasn't lost. It had just been waiting for her. And now, the final chapter was hers to write. In just a few days, everything changed. Clayton was arrested quietly, without a fight. The sheriff found more than enough to connect him to the ring. Old files, bank records, and hidden threats. Rhett's statement sealed it. For the first time in years, the weight on Marlen's chest lifted. Justice hadn't come fast, but it came. And that meant something. The silence her father left behind was finally filled with truth. Marlen stayed on the ranch. She fixed what needed fixing but left certain things untouched, especially the stall with her name carved into it. The Mustang stayed too, always close, like he belonged there. And maybe he did. Neighbors began to stop by again, slower, more respectful. Everyone could feel it. Something had changed. Not just on the land, but in Marlen herself. One cool morning, she saddled the Mustang and rode along the edge of the property. The trail was the same as it was when she was a girl, but everything felt different. She didn't carry the same anger, the same questions. She rode in silence, and it wasn't empty. It was peaceful. For the first time, the past didn't feel like a chain. It felt like part of her. That evening, she found an envelope under the barn floorboards. Her name was on the front in her father's handwriting. Inside, a photo, her as a child, beside her dad and the young Mustang. On the back, he'd written, "He'll come back when you're ready." She sat on the ground, holding it to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. He had known. Somehow, he'd known. The ranch still stood, not just as a home, but as proof that healing is possible. Marlen didn't talk much about what happened. She didn't need to. Her story was in the land, in the barn, in the way the Mustang walked beside her each morning. Some stories aren't told. They're lived. And hers was finally at peace.